it's another topic featuring Germany because there's so much going on. So over the weekend, the Federal Commission on Coal published its final recommendation, and that is to phase out all of coal in Germany by the year 2038. So almost 20 years from now. And so that's a recommendation. And the broader picture is that Germany aims at being carbon neutral by mid-century. And so the government will probably fail its milestone features in the year 2020. And so they think that there will now be a more aggressive schedule necessary to do that. So the recommendation is to phase out all of coal power in Germany by 2038. And that is right now about 40% of power generation in the country. And it comes on top of the nuclear phase out, which was recommended by a similar commission in 2011 after the Fukushima tsunami destroyed a bunch of nuclear reactors in Japan. So by 2022, nuclear will be phased out, and by 2038, all of coal will be phased out in Germany. And what's remarkable is that actually a lot of green advocates were slightly disappointed because this is so far into the future. So they were counting on a phase out by 2030, just 12 years into the future. And both timelines are actually very absurdly short. You have to remember that a coal power plant, if it's built today, it can deliver for 30, 40, 50 years reliable electricity. And so this is really cutting short the potential lifetime of power plants. And so there's now a debate, of course, about this, but it will likely get into a law or regulation. And so I think the key year will be actually 2022, because after the last nuclear reactor will have to go offline, and then aggressively more and more coal power plants will have to go offline. It's very questionable that whether the grid will be stable enough at this point.
Well, Steffen, what is your natural gas situation in Germany? Because that's basically the only reliable energy source that's left after those two.
Yeah, so there's obviously a lot of infrastructure for natural gas for home heating, but so we are pretty much reliant on imports, specifically from the Russian Federation, which might become a political problem the more we rely on that. But it's just the capacity in terms of power generation isn't even there yet. So that would be one of the cornerstones. But as the Commission said or wrote in its final report, renewable power is actually sort of the centerpiece of their strategy to phase out coal, which, is probably not going to work.
Well,
because it's
to what extent do they address the major problems that promoting wind and solar have already had in Germany?
Well, they are not really addressing that. They are saying, similar things to what the administration has said before. So they need to, they recommended hardening the infrastructure, building more power lines, and, to move the excess power from solar and wind generation back and forth throughout the grid. And then also they acknowledge that wind and solar have problems, but they say, well, we'll build a little bit of natural gas and then things will work out well. And so it's vague and somewhat evasive.
I assume that they did not forecast all of the problems that now exist when they promoted the energy transition 10 plus years ago.
Yeah, so, the ancient history of this starts somewhere in 2000 when they started to subsidize wind and solar generation. And so after the Fukushima incident, it actually took up pace. And no, they did. So the debate is about, how quickly can we phase out fossil fuels? and how quickly can we bring electric vehicles on the streets and, increase wind and solar capacity, which like all of these things are sort of contradicting each other, because if you replace oil fuels with electric vehicle battery capacity, where you're not even starting with just replacing what's already there in terms of electricity consumption, you have to multiply that, many times over in order to satisfy the energy demand of electric vehicles.
Yeah. Well, this is definitely a case where Germany is worse than the U.S. Unfortunately, the U.S. has a very bad history of emulating Germany, which is perverse in so many ways. I like having a German who's very free market and pro individual and pro reason, so that we can agree on many of the negative effects that country has had on the world, but in part that are important, that they correlate very strongly with its position of intellectual leadership. So you have a force in the country in the world that's known as an intellectual leader, and that tends to lead the world in a very anti-human direction, historically in a collectivist and racist way, and today in an anti-human way, which is really, as I call it, human racist, anti the human race, because ultimately sacrificing us to the ideal of an unchanged planet.